All right, welcome. This is the Genesee County Compassion Club show. Glad to be here this week with you. Broadcasting live to you from flinttalkradio.com. Catch us live on ustream.tv. Call in today if you have any questions. The number is 810-208-1854. I'm your host, Jeremy. Glad to be here with you today. Got some medical marijuana news for you we want to share. Got some information for you from the Genesee County Compassion Club. And we'll see what else comes up during the show that we can get to you, our viewers. Appreciate you being with us today. And like I said, if you want to join us, just call in. And again, the number is 810-208-1854. I'm all dressed up today, looking a little different. We had a marijuana stakeholders meeting at the Capitol this morning. I was joined by Chelsea from the club, and there were other representatives there from the medical marijuana industry. Robin Schneider was there speaking. Her brother George was there also as well. Appreciate them coming in and sharing with us. Also had Dr. Golnig there, who was doing a presentation on testing THC molecules and so forth. Found out some interesting information I'll share with you on the show today. So I want to get started. One of the major things that we were talking about today at the Capitol was this House Bill 4271. This is the Provisioning Centers Act, as it's being entitled. This is gaining support as we're moving forward in the legislative year. And we went to the Capitol today to talk about the bill and to be able to try to put our input in, and to get some details on the bill. I can tell you the meeting was more of a topical type of meeting. There wasn't a lot of detailed information. And it seems to me like they're still working out some of the details, or maybe quite a few of the details actually, on this bill. And that there still may be some time, or that there is time for input. So I know the main concern here is that people are looking to be able to have safe access centers, places where patients can go to find caregivers, to find their medication. And we have certain areas around the state that are already operating, that already have ordinances in place that allow for their existence and for their regulation. However, there's quite a few areas in Michigan, obviously, that do not have these places available, that have prohibited them, or that just simply don't exist. And so this bill is looking to be able to establish legislation that would allow these centers to operate, that would allow for their existence, and would permit local municipalities to be able to regulate them in a fashion that they seem to agree with. So kind of an interesting concept here. They are putting forth certain regulations that the senators would have to follow in order to be able to operate, and then from there the rules for these centers, how they would be governed, would be set up by LARA, the Licensing and Regulation Department of Michigan, or by the local municipalities. Would have the ability to basically regulate them in a manner that they seem fit. Some of the regulations they're putting forth here are definitely concerns. We want to take a look at how these are set up. First of all, the definition of what these centers would fall under would be any commercial entity that is located in the state that acquires, possesses, cultivates, manufactures, delivers, transfers, or transports medical marijuana, and that sells, supplies, or dispenses medical marijuana to qualifying patients. This would be, basically any commercial property where marijuana is sold to qualifying patients or to registered primary caregivers. So kind of interesting there. I mean, that's the overall definition of how these centers can exist, and it basically, by definition, would encompass any center that would be on commercial property and that would have anything to do with marijuana. Sells, supplies, dispenses, so on and so forth. This is an all-encompassing definition, and so thereby, currently any dispensaries, compassion centers, farmers markets, etc., would fall into this definition that is listed in this bill. Some of the concerns that I have here right in the definition is the word sells. This is one of the things that we discussed briefly at the meeting this morning at the Capitol. And, currently right now we have a Supreme Court ruling that deems sales are not legal under the current provisions of the Act. Or I guess I would rather rephrase that and say that sales are not permitted under Section 4 of the Act. This was from the McQueen case up in Mount Pleasant area, went all the way to the Supreme Court. Some of you recognize that as the apothecary case. And they deemed that the Act did not permit, under Section 4, did not permit sales as a legal means of acquisition for patients and caregivers, and that the Act itself does not detail or lay out the provisions necessary for sales to take place, that the transfer that is happening between a patient and a caregiver is a different type of transaction than a sale, even though it may involve the exchange of product for compensation. The Supreme Court deemed that the sales are something different and that they are not protected. So by definition, in this act here, it doesn't necessarily lay out that sales are now legal. However, it mentions that, if this center in a commercial property sells, that it would be included in this definition. So kind of a vague way of including the word sale, and certainly I think it brings up some concerns right away in the act on whether or not sales are actually permitted or would be permitted if this act should indeed pass. I think we have to bring up the differences of the current situation, which is, we have a patient-to-patient transfers, again, not being protected by Section 4 of the Act, and caregiver-to-caregivers transactions also being in question on whether or not they're actually protected by the current Michigan medical marijuana law. So if these things are already in question, if transfers are already in question, then if we're going to go ahead and permit sales, then I think we need to have a detailed explanation of what a sale is in accordance with the medical marijuana law, and then we need to have a permission, basically, or some type of permissive act passed so that it does lay out the clear guidelines for what constitutes a sale and the fact that the sale itself would be actually permitted or legal. Obviously, if we have sales, I think that we're going to have sales tax. That would be a one thing there. That would be kind of a no-brainer. But also, if you go back to the original act and look at the language there in the act, the medical marijuana law, it does state very specifically that the transfer between a patient and a caregiver, or anyone else for that matter that is registered in the program, and the exchange of product and compensation does not constitute the sale of illegal substances. Now, this may be construed to say that sales are not permitted or that sales are not included in the act. However, I think if you were to go back to the founders of this, or the drafters of the act, I think this was written in as a protection for people so that they would not be prosecuted under federal law, under the sale of an illegal substance. I don't believe that it was included in the bill or the original act to exclude the sale. It was included to provide protection for people that would be making these transfers. So it is a variance in language. It does present some confusion as to what is permitted and what isn't. And I think that this does need to be clarified, especially if we're going to proceed and pass another bill, ultimately permitting sales. And I think to just kind of pass over that, I think that would be a mistake. That's something that we have to have clearly defined if we're going to pass another bill. Currently, I think that transfers are clearly defined, and I think that the compensation there is also very well laid out clearly in the act that we already currently have. Through these court cases that we've had in the Supreme Court and in other court cases, it sort of muddies the water in saying that patient-to-patient transfers are not protected by Section 4. Same thing in patient to caregivers who they may not be connected through the department's registry process, and that also is a gray area that we're trying to get clarification on. And until we can have some clear definitive cases in the courts referencing the entirety of the law, I don't believe that we're going to have that clarity that we're looking for. So I know that this bill here is intended to provide some of that clarity and some of those protections, but I think that we may possibly already have those protections in the law, and that we're simply needing some type of confirmation from authorities as to exactly how that is to be played out. There's some other definitions in this bill here, and this is House Bill 4271, the Provisioning Center Act. One of the things that is also listed is a provisioning center agent, which is listed as a principal officer, a board member, an employee, an operator, or an other individual acting as an agent of a provisioning center. This is kind of interesting, defining in the act, I should say, a provisioning center agent. The question is would the agent have special privileges because they are now an agent? Would they have to be a caregiver? It seems to me that if we're going back to the original act and we're not going to change the variables that are in there, that someone that would be an agent of these centers would in fact have to be a card holder. Whether they be a caregiver or a patient is up to debate, but I think that they would have to be one of those things in order to simply possess medical marijuana by right of the law. So that's another question there, is what exactly is an agent allowed to do? And that's something that we're going to have clarification on too. I'll read some more of this act here to you. Says here, purchasing or receiving medical marijuana, including seedlings, from one or more provisioning centers, if purchasing or receiving marijuana from the center is not prohibited by the municipality. So they're implying here that the centers would have the ability to purchase seedlings or possibly receive and purchase medical marijuana from another center. Again, here we go back to the center's definition, and we just went through that, but would the center itself have the ability to possess medical marijuana, and if so, how much, and how is this going to be regulated? If we're not going to change the original law, like I've stated, then how is it that the center itself would be able to possess medical marijuana? Currently, right now, the only people that are allowed to possess medical marijuana are patients and caregivers who are licensed through the registry process. So if the center now, which is a commercial entity that transfers medical marijuana, it seems to me that we would need to have a clear definition in this act on the center's ability to possess marijuana, how it can do that, and exactly how much. I think this definitely needs to be laid out here, and this is certainly a concern if we're going to have these centers operating. It's a nice idea to have a safe access center, and I know that that's what is at the heart of this law, is that we would have safe access points for patients to be able to get medication. And to get into that into detail a bit, I think we have to look at the current situation and realize where patients are coming from in a day-to-day scenario. We have patients that are going to physicians and receiving the recommendation. They're having that discussion. They're having that bona fide patient relationship established and followed through on, and finding out that, okay, medical marijuana is an option for them, and then taking advantage of that option, registering through the state, receiving their state license, their card in the mail, and so forth. So now they're a bona fide patient having the ability to use cannabis as a medicine. And then from there, the question is, how do they acquire it? And under the current system, obviously, they can elect to have a caregiver or be a provider for themselves. So in that scenario, again, okay, now the legal premise is provided for, but how do they actually, in practice, go out and acquire this medication? We have obviously safety concerns, there's health concerns, and then we ultimately, and most importantly, we need to make sure that the patients are able to get medication that's going to be suitable for their ailments. And this can be a very difficult thing for patients to be able to acquire, to be able to locate, and I think that's something that we have to take into consideration. So a need for a commercial entity to exist, or a business of some sort where patients can go to find options, to find information, and to find caregivers or other patients for that matter. I think there is a viable need for that, outside of the current system that exists. Now, I know that patients nowadays can go to various websites. Maybe they'll pick up a newspaper ad and see caregivers posting that they have an availability to take on an additional patient. So there's an option there for some patients. Outside of the few places that do exist in Michigan where they can go and find a caregiver. But in those areas where they don't have that option, the question remains, how does a patient actually find the medication that they are looking for? And so there is a definite need for entities or collectives of caregivers to exist to where they can go to a brick and mortar establishment and say, okay, here's my registration, I am a bona fide patient, and now let's talk about what medication is available and exactly in what form can I get it in, what's going to work for me, have some options to try out, and be able to do that in a safe, legal atmosphere. And that's really what this law was passed for, so that patients would have the ability to acquire that medication. So we do have some concerns, and I do see that there is a need for commercial entities to exist. I think that it can exist in the encumbrance of the current model that we have, but when we have law enforcement or administration that is trying to deter these establishments from existing, it can be very, very difficult for those places to operate, and also scary for the people that are doing so. So I do see that there is a legal need for something like this to be established. However, how we decide to come together and to establish these centers is certainly going to be the difficult part. I think this bill is in concept a good idea, but in its actual layout and writing, it still needs some work. We have to have very clear guidelines and language in this bill that will establish the legality for these places to exist. The difficult part here is the conundrum that we have with our law. The law that we have right now is a constitutional amendment. It was passed by the voters. It was written by the voters. And because of that, it requires a 2/3 majority in the House and the Senate, as you may well know, in order to change anything about this bill. So if any proposed legislation that should come up now or in the future would have a bearing on the current bill that we already have, the current law that exists for medical marijuana, if anything in that is affected, well, it requires a 2/3 majority change. So right now, legislators are trying to come up with different ways to institute changes or availabilities in medical marijuana for patients, but also at the same time trying to skirt tail around the current law that we have so that they don't have to have that supermajority in the House and Senate. So it can create some difficulties for legislators to try to craft legislation that is going to be acceptable, clear, and at the same time not have implications on the current law. And I just don't know if that's a possibility. I mean, we have currently right now, obviously, the problems with the distribution centers, in question of whether or not they have the ability to remain in operation or ability to even be in existence. And then we also have other issues going on right now, such as, what is usable cannabis, what is usable marijuana for patients. And this is something that's being tossed around in our courts right now. We have the Carruthers decision, which was well talked about on some of our previous episodes, where we have edible forms of cannabis, we have topical forms, there are tinctures available, other than just the typical dried flowered form that is clearly stated in the law. There are other forms here that patients are using to medicate with, and the question is how do we make sure that type of medication is in compliance with the Act? Patients are allowed to have 2.5 usable ounces of material, and usable is listed in the Act as the dried, flowered parts of the marijuana plant. So the parts of the plant that are deemed as unusable, are they still protected? And I think if you go back to the language in the law, it is protected. You'll see that the flowers, the leaves, and the other parts of the plant in its entirety, also any different types of preparations, concoctions of marijuana, are protected in the Act. So even though we may have some court cases that create different types of conundrums in understanding exactly what is protected, if we go back to the original language, I think you'll see that it is protected. And in the Carruthers decision, again, we're going back to this Section 4 protection, and the court stated that, this edible form of cannabis that was seized by the police is deemed as unusable because it didn't contain the dried flowered parts. It had other parts of the plant. So it wasn't protected as the 2.5 usable ounces of material. However, it's still protected potentially by the other parts of the Act. And so that's why this case may end up in the Supreme Court. We'll see. But until then, it again puts patients in a bit of a gray area and it makes them feel uncomfortable to possessing or to transferring or acquiring the medication in the form that they prefer if it's outside of that dried flowered form. So this is another issue that we have in the law that's currently being bounced around in the courts. And so if we're going to pass further legislation, I think we need to make sure that if we're going to build on the current law as a foundation for future laws, well, we have to make sure that what we're building on is clear and well defined, and that's something that is going to have to be addressed. And it'll either be addressed in the court system or legislatively. So House Bill 4271, I think we're up in arms on this. We definitely had some different concerns from the other shareholders that showed up to the meeting on whether or not protections would or would not exist inside of the act. And I think that these are valid concerns brought forth by the people that showed up to the meeting today. So I do appreciate having the meeting. It is good to have these discussions. I think we need to have more discussion on this. And I would tell you, there are quite a few people that have co-signed onto this bill. So we see that, our legislators in the House here in Michigan are privy to the concerns of patients having a safe place to go to. What we need to do is further educate these legislators on exactly how these can work, what is going to work best for patients and caregivers alike. And I think that if we do that, then we may have the possibility of furthering the writing in this legislation so that it's a better, clear picture for the people that may end up operating with it. Some of the representatives that have already co-signed onto this bill are right here in Genesee County. Representative Stanley and Representative Ananik have both co-signed onto this bill. So there's two people right there that you could contact in this area that are your representatives and voice your opinions on this. Now, again, these are supportive representatives that recognize patients' and caregivers' rights and also recognize the need for their medication and are starting to find out exactly what does that entail. And so it's our responsibility as card holders and as U.S. citizens that we can voice our opinions and let them know exactly what these needs are. So I'd encourage you to do that if you have time to contact your representatives and let them know exactly what your concerns are and what maybe some of the difficulties are in being a patient or a caregiver here in Michigan, and letting them know what these concerns are in detail so that they can address these in legislation. This has not gone through committee yet. It is up yet for review, and so we have yet to have a public hearing on this bill. If it does go to committee, if it is held, then there definitely will be a public hearing. And I know that the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, that's where this bill would go through, is well aware of the bill and has also stated that he may be interested in looking at it here sometime this fall. So time is ticking away on this. Also, Representative Irwin signed on to this. He was on the show a few weeks ago. Representative Colton was the one who held the meeting today in Lansing. He is the sponsor of the bill. He's from the west side of the state, and also some other representatives as well. But you can be assured that they will be interested in hearing your input, so I would encourage you to give that input if you should have time. All right, that's enough on the bill there. I did want to cover that since we had the shareholder meeting today, and I definitely appreciate everyone showing up there today and speaking. It was nice to have that. It's good for us to be able to have input, and we definitely need more input. Got some other information I want to share with you today. I know we've got some events coming up at the Compasion Club. We've got our chili cook-off coming up here next month, so look for more information on that. This is where you're going to basically be able to compete, make your own and bring your own chili. We'll have a big contest, some awards and prizes, and it's just basically a lot of fun. This is going to be here at the very beginning of November. Let me pull up my calendar here so I can tell you guys when exactly it's going to be. Let's see here. Nope. All right, this is November. I believe it's November 2nd that we're going to be having this, which is a Saturday. We'll be having that at the club, and it is our annual chili cook-off. And I'll tell you, last year we had, I think, 8 or 9 entries, and every one of them was just absolutely amazing. So even if you're not able to cook up your own chili dish, make sure you come on out on November 2nd and experience some really tasty cooking. As I tell you, we got some real top chefs in our club. You always joke around about cannabis users having the munchies. Well, they know how to cook. I can tell you that. So come on out to that if you can. Also, we've got here coming up towards the end of the month, we have our regular soup kitchen that we'll be serving at the North End Soup Kitchen over on Stewart. And that's always a lot of fun to be a part of. Like to come on out if you can. And I believe that is going to be October 26th, which is the Saturday. And we'll be serving there. I think we're also serving on the 25th. Don't quote me on that, but I believe those are the dates. You can sign up for that at the club. We're looking for about 7 to 9 volunteers for each one of those days. So if you have time, we'd appreciate it. We serve from, usually it's from 4 to 5 is when we're actually doing our serving. We like to be over at the soup kitchen by about 2:30, so we have time to prepare the food, prepare the eating area, do a little cleaning for them, cooking, whatever needs to be done at the soup kitchen. And then you also get fed. So you can come on out, grab a meal, help some people in need. And we definitely appreciate all of our volunteers in the past that have helped us out with that. And we want to continue to be a part of helping to make Flint a little bit better of a place. So I've got some other information here for you I want to share with you this week. Some other marijuana news. There's been some, there's always stuff going on here across the country. And it's amazing how quickly or how many different things are going on with medical marijuana. And not just medical marijuana, but obviously we've been talking a lot lately about Colorado and Washington with their legalized marijuana. It looks like they'll be up and running here by the first of the year in January. And it's just interesting to see how the industry is moving. There was an article posted here on a number of different websites about industry shareholders, investors trying to move in on the business of marijuana, specifically in Colorado. And I know that one of the articles I read said that a group here, I think it was ArcView, which is an investor group for marijuana businesses, had pledged over $1 million to different businesses collectively for startups, medical marijuana, or not, I'm sorry, I keep saying medical marijuana because that's what we do, but these are just recreational, anybody marijuana. I know they have their rules and so forth. Now, ArcView is, again, it's an investors group, and they have pledged over $1 million committed to different marijuana companies in Colorado. So it's kind of interesting there. It says there was they had 60 different investors, and they met with 22 different companies, and that was in Denver. So kind of interesting there. I know that, I guess one of the things I find that's interesting is you've got $1 million here being moved, and yet most banks won't even touch marijuana money. So how they're moving that money around, I don't know. I guess they have their ways of doing it. And, this is part of a developing business. It's going to take time. And I know that some of the pressures that have been placed on them are issues like taxes and payroll and so forth, and generally banking types or accounting types of activities, as these are real issues for these businesses that they have to deal with, and it has to be done whether or not they've got a bank that will take their money or not. So I know that there is a House bill. This is a federal bill. It's 2652, and it is the Marijuana Business Access to Banking Act. This bill would protect banks that deal with marijuana-related businesses so that they wouldn't be construed as helping drug activity. And it would allow these banks the freedom to go in and to be able to operate just as they would with any other business. And it also, there's other parts of this act that would allow for these businesses to claim normal deductions, such as like payroll expenses or rent, or their electric bill for that matter. And currently right now, because marijuana is still illegal on a federal level, these businesses are not granted tax deductions like a normal business would be. And obviously it makes things a lot tougher for them to operate. But this is one of those things that's going to take time. There's another bill, it was H.R. 1523, and this was the one dealing with the tax deductions. And again, that is a federal bill. So if you're interested in supporting those, you need to contact your federal representative in Washington.
The reason why I think behind a lot of that too, though, is they want to keep the people who are not for medical marijuana want to still keep it part of the underground economy. So by not allowing it for deductible or not allowing for easy transaction for a purchase concerning that, they could keep it and then they can label it as like, look how much money is being spent on this underground economy. So I think that's largely a portion of why they're trying to do they were doing this. So that's my opinion anyway.
Yeah, it might be right, John. I mean, I think that it's definitely a concern here. And, obviously if you've got a business that's, operating with a lot of cash, it presents security concerns for them as well, amongst a whole lot of other problems. I mean, you can imagine as a business owner, if you're trying to, pay your rent every month or just trying to take care of your normal ordering and so forth. Most ordering nowadays is all done by credit cards and done by bank accounts. Nowadays most people pay their taxes through electronic fund transfers. So, you can't do that if you don't have a bank account. And that's something that these businesses that are, they're operating legitimately within their state guidelines, or at least they're planning to. It's something that presents a real conundrum for them. How do you actually conduct your business when you're being told, oh, well, you don't have the channels to be able to do so? So, interesting. Some other stories here, share with you. There was a poll done in California about marijuana legalization. It's kind of funny that California and Washington beat California in the legalization bid, if you will. They had in California, they had their run for legalization in 2012, which ultimately got voted down. And a lot of people said that was because of the competing businesses and kind of what you were just saying, John, as far as people that were already in the business not wanting to have to compete with a legalized type of form. But, this is something here, the policy or the survey that was done was by the Public Polling Institute of California, and they found that 52% of the state's residents advocate legalization of marijuana. 60% of the voters, California voters, supported legalization. So a little bit different language there. And then it said on top of that, there's another question that was posed that said that 68% said that the federal government should not intervene in states' jurisdiction on marijuana. So another different issue. But I guess that doesn't really surprise me. I know that around the country, it seems to be pretty consistent that about 50% of the population feels like this is a substance that should be legalized. I think that us that are dealing with this as a medicine for medicine, understand that, definitely can resonate with that, but I think it's also interesting that we have to continue to fight for the need or for the right of these patients to access this medication when so many people feel like it should just be available to anyone. And I think that's definitely something that we should take into consideration. Let's see here. A couple other stories I will share with you. Pull this up here. I apologize. Give me just one moment. All right, I wanted to cover this story here. I know this is about another part of marijuana. It's about hemp, and I thought this was kind of an interesting story. Recently in California, they just introduced legislation to potentially allow industrial hemp agriculture to begin. So that would be nice if we could get some more support there for that in California. But here in Colorado, or in Colorado, I should say, someone's already done it. There's a gentleman here that has Ryan Laughlin has planted 55 acres of cannabis, and it's not. This is not the cannabis that people use to get high, or it's not the type of cannabis that people use as medicine. This is hemp, and it's not something that people can get high with. It doesn't have the same type of molecules in it that people use for medicinal purposes, but it is used in a number of different industrial type of applications. We ship it into this country all the time for different products. In fact, I think Mercedes-Benz has like over 50 pounds of hemp in their car, used in different portions of it in the C-Class. Not that I have one of those, but it is used quite frequently throughout a lot of different products. This gentleman here, Ryan Laughlin, he planted 55 acres of marijuana, and last week, I guess, was his first harvest, and I thought it was interesting. He tried to use a combine to harvest this, but the combine actually ended up destroying too much of the plant. So he is left to attempt to harvest his crop by hand. So can you imagine trying to harvest 55 acres of industrial hemp? It seems like that would be quite the job there.
It's awfully hard to find size nowadays too. Those size, I've cut 3 acres down with a scythe, and that's like it's a real hell of a job.
And that was 3 acres. This guy's got 55.
Yeah, it's like you just have to pace yourself. A few days. But that's all. Besides, I think it'd be very fibrous too. So I think they'd have to come up with specialized machinery to actually harvest this correctly.
Well, and I'm sure that in other countries where it is produced commercially for agricultural purposes, they do have specialized machinery geared just for that. And as most farmers will tell you that depending on what crop they're doing, whether it's soybean, wheat, or corn, their machines are geared to handle each one of those types of produce. So it's no wonder that this would also have the same type of thing. The interesting thing about this story is that Ryan has done this ahead of legislation. The Colorado Department of Agriculture is working on rules for registering hemp farmers and hoping to have them in place by 2014. However, Ryan Laughlin decided that he couldn't wait. So he just went ahead and did it.
Well, he probably will face some kind of jail time or some contrived stuff. On some contrived charge.
Potentially, yes. It is definitely a potential. It is illegal to grow this because it is considered the same as marijuana, even though it isn't. But he could potentially face some issues here. However, so far, he has not. He has not had a problem yet. So we'll see. He had a harvest dinner. Some of the people from Vote Hemp showed up to support. Also, people from Dr. Bronner's Magic Soaps showed up. And also people from the Hemp Industries Association made an appearance at his first harvest celebration. So, and again, we're talking about hemp here. This is a fibrous material. It is a sister to the marijuana plant. And it is not something that could be used or abused. And it doesn't have the types of cannabinoids present that marijuana that you typically associate with does contain. So, really there shouldn't be a need to go in and try to raid Mr. Ryan. So we'll have to see how this goes. I wish him the best of luck. Obviously, he's going to be trying to use this for different types of materials. One of those ones is a soap. So, this could be made into concrete, could be made into different types of plastic, biodiesel, so on and so forth. A lot of different things that it could be used for, but it can't be used for abuse. So I guess that's a nice kind of a light at the end of the tunnel sort of thing, and hopefully it'll be enough to keep him protected. Some other interesting thing here, Iowa lawmaker. I'm reading to you from Toke of the Town. This is Iowa lawmaker wants to decriminalize marijuana and legalize medical cannabis. So this is a state senator who plans to introduce medical marijuana and marijuana decriminalization bills actually today in Iowa. So and they say that they don't have a chance to get passed in Iowa, but maybe they will. And certainly I'm sure there's folks out there in Iowa who would like to be able to use this as a medicine and currently do not have the access to do that. Another story here from Toke of the Town is Vermont State Police. Title is Vermont State Police Cutting Back on Cannabis Eradication Flyovers Due to Budget Concerns. Says the state police depend on funding from the feds for their program to cover the police overtime. And the state law state law enforcement have about $25,000 set aside for the program, which is down about $9,000 from previous years. And they say that it's arguably a waste of resources. In 2012, a mere 1,500 outdoor and indoor plants were combined were seized in Vermont, and a total of 14 people were arrested in 2012 due to the program, which was down 35 from 2010. So, that does seem like a large amount of money to be used to simply arrest 14 people. It does seem like they're aware of that and that they're going to be cutting back on this because of the fact that it is not a valuable use of their resources. kind of interesting there. All right. Go up to our neighbors to the north here, Canada. Talked a little bit about this on the last couple shows. This is news announcement here that the Canadian government is planning on pumping about $1.3 billion into their pot growing for medicinal purposes. I read a story earlier this week about a Hershey's chocolate factory, being refurbished for medical cannabis cultivation. And also Health Canada, which is the program that runs the medical marijuana for the patients in Canada. Currently it says there's 37,000 medical marijuana patients in the entire country, which is kind of small actually compared to just Michigan.
Well, I think there's only like 32 million people in Canada.
Well, certainly, but there's only about 8 million people in Michigan.
Well, we got a lot more ailments, and
I don't know about that.
But people are just sick of being in Michigan, maybe. I don't know. I shouldn't say that, right?
Well, I can tell you this. One of the big things about that number you need to know is that in Canada, it's a lot more difficult to be able to get on the Health Canada program.
Really?
Yes, it's very difficult for people to be able to register. And from what I've been told, you pretty much need to be on your deathbed in order to be able to get this as a medication.
Now, does their healthcare system, they pay for that, for the medical marijuana? Or
I do not believe that it is covered quite the same. I think they have controls on the cost. Currently, right now, the cost is listed at $5 a gram, which is a pretty low amount compared to the rest of the prices listed across the U.S. anyways. And I don't know if that has to do with maybe some type of insurance coverage or not. But the interesting thing here is that with this new program that they're rolling out is that they are going to be eliminating all of the current home growers or caregivers in Canada and replacing them with these commercial entities. So the people who previously had the ability to either provide for themselves or to provide for patients, they will no longer have that ability. It'll be taken away from them, and then patients will be forced to use the Health Canada program and their licensed providers solely to rely on for their medication. So they expect that the cost may go down, but currently they're predicting that the cost is going to go up for patients who are using this as a medication.
Of course it is. I mean, you got a one-source supplier. It's going to go up, and there's not going to be any competition. So that's basically it's just going to skyrocket. I'd see. I mean, that's the problem with socialism, but you can't make people see that. So that's my opinion, editorial.
Well, and there's a note in here that one of the companies that they plan to give back 10% of their yield to help impoverished patients receive low-cost medication. So and that's. It's a good thing, obviously, but are there caregivers currently right now in Canada that are providing medication to their patients for free? Absolutely, I'm sure they are.
So I was going to say, I mean, it's like it's corporate goodwill, but I mean, it's like it's overlooked by the government. It's oversights by the government, obviously. So I'm rolling my eyes on this because I just think it's ridiculous that they already have a system in place. It's totally functioning, and just by doing this, they're just some politicians paying off some political contributor, just like they're going to do here if we don't watch it.
Well, and it says currently right now that they have a network of 4,200 registered growers in Canada, and I can't help but think of the 4,200 people there that are going to no longer have that as an income potential. Certainly, they're probably reimbursed for their cost and time associated with providing the medication. And I'm sure there's some people out there that also did it for free. But, there's 4,200 people more. I don't think you're going to have 4,200 people working in these factories, so to speak, pot factories, if you want to call them. I highly doubt that that's going to be replaced, evenly. So, kind of replacing the Main Street for Wall Street type of thing. And
I've had friends who oppose marijuana for medicinal purposes, and one of the reasons why they cite is there's no oversight on what's put onto the plants, what it's grown in, what type of fertilizer. And one of my friends says, "Oh, they could be smoking it, but they're smoking Miracle Grow." And I said, "Well, we haven't been part of the show for so many years that I see that you're actually doing a great deal of self-policing by bringing the diagnostics group in that analyzes people's genetic material." And gives them a readout of what's their readouts on different levels of different chemicals, and I mean I think that's a great thing, and I think that's you're one of the big you're the Genesee Compassion Club is like County Compassion Club is what the biggest thing in Michigan. So I mean that's a good thing. You guys actually have these kind of self-policing things already established.
Well, and I think that most of the people that we have in the club, that are patients and caregivers, you're not going to have somebody who's more concerned about their efficacy of their medicine and the quality controls that are in place than the people who are actually using it. And that's something to take into account. The marijuana itself is benign. There's no toxicity level. There's no lethal dose rating for marijuana. It just is not something that is going to hurt someone. But you're right, John. It's the things that are put onto the plant in its growth phase, or maybe even afterwards during processing, that could have the potential for hurting someone. And that is a concern. Now, some of these places that have been regulated have already been caught using different types of pesticides and plant growth inhibitors that would not be used or not approved for consumption purposes. So even though you may have regulation in place, even though there may be some type of state-run or state-licensed, government-bodied type of entity that is supposedly going to provide safe cannabis, it doesn't guarantee that is what's going to happen. The only thing that can guarantee that is testing it, proving it, and therefore having the patient be able to get in contact with the product that's going to be guaranteed that it's not going to hurt them.
Okay, well, this is just a question off the top of my head. Maybe it's an unfair question because you didn't have a chance to prepare for it, but of your people who are providers of medical marijuana, how many would you say, what's a percentage would you say, just off maybe just a ballpark figure of who actually submits material to this? What's that diagnostics group that comes in and does the analysis?
Well, there's many different analysis labs or laboratories across the state that are providing analysis for caregivers and patients right now. And to put it into a number, John, I really couldn't tell you right now how many caregivers are actually utilizing those services. I know that they're becoming more and more popular, and I know that more patients are asking or demanding that their medication be tested. So this is certainly a concern. I think that we have to take a look at this from a regulatory perspective and decide, is testing something that should be mandated? This is one of the things that is actually in the bill that we were discussing earlier today in House Bill 4271. I think testing is a good idea. I think it should be up to the patient to decide whether or not they want to be able to have that tested. And, right now they do. As a patient, you can say, well, I don't want something that hasn't been tested. Or you could say, well, I don't really care, and I'll just take my chances. And that's something that patients have to take into consideration for themselves. And I think that, you as a patient, when you go to the doctor, you may assume that the doctor is going to automatically, give you medications that are going to be good for you. But, it is you who is putting that into your body. So it's ultimately you who is responsible, that is going to be responsible for whether or not it really was good. You mentioned in a previous episode on the show here about how you had a family member who had been prescribed something by a doctor that actually was lethal and that they should not take. So, ultimately, even though we may have controls and regulations in place to try to ensure safety, it is not a guarantee, obviously, and it is really up to the person ingesting the material to decide and to make that call. And I think that's something that you're always going to have.
I don't remember if you remember this because I'm older than you are, but back in the late 70s, early 80s, they had a paraquat. They sprayed stuff on the fields to grow marijuana, I think in California and other states like that. The government did this to kill the plant. And then now people are smoking and get deathly ill, really sick, close to death and everything. So they had this system set up so that people could send samples of their marijuana to get tested to make sure it wasn't, tainted with this paraquat. So, I mean, the government people who are standing against the opposite, saying, well, these are unscrupulous dealers or people are going to do this or providers are going to do this. Ironically, it's the government themselves that actually did the biggest case of that in U.S. history was because of their actions and not a private concern. Yeah,
interesting. Well, the government's full of irony. I mean, we have a current shutdown going on right now, but of course the people who created the shutdown are still getting paid. So how's that for irony?
Yeah, it's like let's face it, they're self-serving, what's. I mean, it's...
That's just how it goes. And that's why you can't rely on regulation or, rules to so-called, protect you. You have to take that into your own responsibility. And that can be a difficult thing to do. You take for granted the food products that you buy at the store, You assume that those are going to be healthy, they're going to be safe, but ultimately it is your responsibility. I mean, if you go into the refrigerator and pull out a bag of salad that you purchased last week and now it's moldy or it's gone bad, I mean, you have to make that call. And it seems silly to have to discuss that, but I mean, that is something that you do. You go to the pantry, you pull out that loaf of bread and it's got mold on it. Well, obviously, you know, that's your call to decide, oh, do I scrape it off and eat what's left? Or throw it away? Do I not care? And, you know, people who have serious health concerns, who may have, you know, depleted immune systems, they have to be extra careful. And so maybe they do want to have medication that has been tested and guaranteed. Some of the testing that is being performed right now is simply potency testing. So we have to have a consideration as patients on, okay, has this been tested in the manner that I need to have it tested for my own concerns? Has it been tested for pathogens or carcinogens or other types of things, that molds, viruses, and so forth? If those things are, you know, on your list of no-nos, and I know that nobody wants those types of things, but, you know, there are certain people that just cannot afford the gamble. And if that's their case, then that testing currently right now, it is available. It's just up to them to make that demand. And I think that that's a good thing. The problem is that if we mandate testing, if we go to the length of regulating exactly what testing is out there and so forth, that the cost is inhibitive. I mean, we don't have health care coverage for cannabis consumers, for medical patients. There's no types of subsidies available right now to provide their medication. So if we mandate that this testing has to be done on everything out there, well, you might just make it unaffordable to patients, and so now it's not even attainable.
Well, I think it's what the best thing is going to develop out of this is a form of a guild, and people who like join this guild and say, here's the conditions for belonging to this guild, you know, and that we're going to allow this kind of, we're going to actually demand this kind of testing for our members. And then when you got that stamp of approval, it's going to be just like, you know, I would say it's comparable to anything the government would stamp it with, you know, and say you buy it from this guild. They've a proven track record, like Underwriters Laboratory. It's a private company. That's not a fund. And then let's face it, anybody who's intelligent enough is not going to buy an electronic device that's not been certified by Underwriters Laboratory.
Sure.
So I mean that's a voluntary. I think that's a private concern that does those testings.
Yeah, so. And most of the labs that exist out there today in Michigan for cannabis testing, these are private labs. They're third parties. They're not tied in with any types of provisioning centers or anything like that. So they don't have any type of incentive to try to skew their testing. They're just simply trying to provide valid information to the patients and caregivers, and then allowing them to make their own deductions from there. So, and I think that's the best scenario too. Whereas if you have say for instance, you have a dispensary that is tied to a testing lab, well then they may have incentive to say, well, you know, we don't want to talk about this particular result that showed up because now the center has all this material and they need to get rid of it. And, if we tell people that it has this problem with it, no one's going to want it. You know, I think having that lab be third party, be unattached from these centers or dispensaries, I think that's the best scenario because they're inclined to just simply produce results. And therefore the people that are providing that to them can go ahead and make changes in their gardening practices, or at least know and inform their patients exactly what is available and what isn't. And I think that's important. So I think testing is obviously a good thing. We want to be able to provide valid information to the patients so that they know exactly what they're ingesting, and also be able to prevent any type of unwarranted or unwanted types of scenarios with medication that could be tainted with something that is going to be dangerous. I got one more thing I wanted to share for you today. This was a study out of the Boston University School of Medicine and the Boston Medical Center. And the study randomly sampled patients that had tested positive for marijuana to see if marijuana had any impact on their health. And they came up with no negative correlations. Basically, they said there is no difference between people who smoke cannabis daily and those who do not. They were listed here in the Daily Free Press. Says the results that there is no impact if we compare those who continually use cannabis in comparison to those who have been tested positive for alcohol or other substances that they have consumed. 589 adults were studied, and out of that number, 84% had used marijuana, 25% had used cocaine, 23% used opiates, and 8% were on other drugs. 58% only used cannabis and not other drugs. By comparison, the marijuana users didn't have any higher rates of admissions to emergency rooms or have any increase in diagnosed medical problems. That's kind of interesting. I mean, they're comparing marijuana use to other types of drug use. I mean, I think that's kind of a silly. I mean, obviously, types of drugs like cocaine and alcohol, we know that those have a lethal dose rating that can kill you. They also have short-term and long-term effects on people's health. Those have been proven time and time again. And I think, comparing marijuana use to those is just silly to begin with. But, you have to take these studies with a grain of salt. And I think that if you read into them is your best bet so you can find out exactly what is it that they were studying. And sometimes the headline doesn't always represent the actual study. So kind of interesting there. So before you go blabbing that, this said that, and that's, make sure you check into it. So, all right, that's about it for what I had to share with you guys today. Just wanted to keep you up to date on what's been happening at the Capitol, let you know what's happening down at the club. I appreciate you joining me here. And John, thanks for being with me in the studio today. It's always a pleasure to be at the flinttalkradio.com. And thanks for being on the Genesee County Compassion Club show. You guys have a great week, and I'll see you here next week.